Hello, everybody. Today we have for you a discussion between the investment landscape and the product landscape. We're going to have a chat between Vijay Reddy from Intel Capital and Binay from our Intel Artificial Intelligence Group. They'll be discussing the landscape and the investment landscape, the ecosystem and the products within, and what makes them the most relevant players in that space. Both of them come with tremendous experience with enterprise, with cloud service providers, and artificial intelligence. So without further ado, here we take it to Vijay and Binay.
Good morning. I'm Investment Director at Intel Capital. My name is Vijay Reddy. Been with Intel Capital for the last 5 years. I've been focusing on investments in AI, and happy to walk you through some of our investments in the sector, and also talk about Intel Capital and some of the issues our startups are seeing and some of the opportunities we're seeing in this landscape, which can be translated to larger enterprises, and we'll talk through it.
And I'm Binay Ackalloor. I'm with the Intel Artificial Intelligence Products Group. I lead the cloud service provider business development team, and I've previously led the enterprise business development team. Looking forward to sharing some of our experiences today.
Yeah. Just to give you a brief introduction of Intel Capital, we've invested $12 billion to date, all the way since 1991. We've invested in 1,500 companies across 57 countries. So we're truly global. We invest in seed, A, and B, which is kind of our sweet spot, but we also do growth investments as well. And if we look at the investment sectors, we have many focus areas. AI is just one of them. But AI has become so ubiquitous that it stretches across a lot of different subsectors as well. We are very prolific AI investors across computer vision, speech, automotive, infrastructure, IoT, and verticals. And here's a sample list of our portfolio. And I think one of the questions we got was, there's so much noise in the ecosystem, and everybody claims to be an AI company. And if you have heard Sundar or the guys at Microsoft, they talk about shift from mobile first to cloud first to AI first companies. And it's very hard to say what an AI first company is. And I like this analogy from Andrew Ng. It changed a little bit. Just because you're a car dealer and have a website doesn't make you an internet company, right? Internet companies do A/B testing. They have different kind of infrastructure, not just for doing the software, but also for implementing the software and so on. And in a similar vein, just because you have a .ai in your website and you have applied some deep learning doesn't make you an AI company, right? And the way you think about it is, how does a company organize to do the things that AI lets you do really well? I think that gets to the crux of what an AI first company is. And so here are some things which we typically look for as we look at startups, and we try to find the companies which are AI first and those which are not. Not that there's nothing wrong with the non-AI first, but if they claim to be an AI first company, they need to meet certain criteria. And this could be applicable even for enterprises, because as you look at vendors, you probably want to find out if they're really an AI company or one of the other companies calling themselves an AI. So the first one is, does the team have the right expertise? We have invested in a lot of professors from leading universities, but you don't need to be an expert researcher or someone who has done a PhD in AI to be called an AI expert. As long as you know what kind of AI technologies you need to implement and then staying on top of trends, that's good enough. But you need a team which is really solid when it comes to implementing AI. More importantly, you need to have the relevant domain knowledge. And an example I could give is, if the startup is focusing on radiology and using AI, you can detect cancer. And we now know that AI can detect with a higher accuracy than humans can. But you need to know how to sell into large companies. You need to know about FDA and also on HIPAA and so on. So domain knowledge in that particular vector is very important for us, even for very deep tech AI companies. The third is AI strategy, and it extends all the way down to what is your data strategy? What is your moat? How do you think about collecting more data? How do you think about having human in the loop? So we heard Mike talk from Forrester. So AI strategy is something we pay a lot of attention to see if they've thought through not just the model building piece, but also the model deployment piece. The fourth one is systems and infrastructure, and we heard from the previous speaker how the systems and infrastructure need to be agile, and they need to be able to catch the model drifts. So there's a certain amount of infrastructure specific to AI, which would be necessary to start from scratch. And last but not the least is the AI culture. And we've seen a lot of teams where you bring in an AI expert, and the culture doesn't change to an AI culture. And what I mean by that is some of the companies who've done really well have a Friday standing meetings where you talk about AI research. And you tend to bring on the right team and so on. So I would say culture in terms of AI is extremely critical. And I'll leave this up to Binay and maybe asking him, how do enterprises get started when they think about AI transformation?
Okay. Thanks, Vijay. In talking to enterprises, as Vijay mentioned, it isn't just a matter of hiring a few data scientists and saying you're an AI company. There's really a lot to do to implement AI in a particular enterprise. And one of the first things to do is, how do you identify the right kind of projects that you want to do? And a lot of times what we've seen is that an enterprise might just have a couple of people who are enthusiastic about AI and working on some projects. And that's a great way for people to get their feet wet. But it's not necessarily a way to implement AI. And so in terms of the implementation, you really need to have a lot of things in place. One is, do you have this in-house AI team that can actually figure out how to take the AI all the way from concept to deployment? And then the second is, you need to have a way to broaden the capabilities of the enterprise itself in AI. And so your AI team needs to also train not just the engineers, but also the executives and senior business leaders. A lot of time, for better or for worse, right now AI is a very popular term. And so a lot of senior executives will say, well, we have to do AI. But it's not clear what exactly that means. And so this is where the AI team can really help in getting the company up to speed on what that means. And then you need to develop an AI strategy. You can certainly implement AI in piecemeal in certain projects as proof of concepts and so on. But to really change the enterprise from being a traditional company to an AI-first type of company, you need to have an AI strategy. And what I mean by that is, for instance, you may start off saying, oh, well, I want to apply AI to my manufacturing process. And then you may quickly find that the data is in different places, they're not in the right formats, things like that. So there's got to be a data strategy associated with that AI strategy. And then you may find that the information that you get from your suppliers or your partners are not what you need. And you may have third-party companies that provide services to your company, and those are a vital part of implementing our AI strategies. So all of this has to be comprehended, and that's why it's good to start with that AI strategy as well. And then you also need to address some of the different misgivings people might have about AI. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about jobs, and jobs may disappear and so on. So I think that's not necessarily true. Those are the kinds of things that need to be addressed. But then there's also ethical and legal implications that have to be taken into account. Is this a project that complies with all the applicable local rules and regulations? So just a lot of things to take into consideration.
So Binay, can you talk a little bit more about what Intel is doing in AI? How do you seed the ecosystem, and how do you make sure Intel is a part of the AI growing ecosystem?
Thanks, Vijay. So thanks to Intel Capital, we have a lot of companies that have become partners of our AI Builder program. That's one of our key tenets of our ecosystem seeding. So this is where we have partners that have capabilities in different areas of AI. AI is a vast area. You can implement AI all the way from a manufacturing company to a financial services company to a medical imaging type of company. So, having partners through Intel Capital and our AI Builders program is vital so that we can work with enterprises across the board. The second part of the ecosystem is, AI is a new area. And when we started a few years ago, a lot of different groups within companies didn't even know where to start and whether AI was possible for AI would provide a good return for a particular problem they were looking at. So one of the things we also did was work on different types of use cases to see if AI could provide a benefit. And then the third is the whole research area. This is a very fast-moving area. You look, for instance, just if you look at frameworks, right? A few years ago, it was all about Caffe. Now it's about TensorFlow. And then there's PyTorch and MXNet and so on. So a lot of things are moving there. And then if you look at where it's being applied, a few years ago it was all about image recognition. Then it became video, and now it's moving into natural language processing. So this area is advancing constantly. And working with partners, working with researchers, and working through some of these use cases is incredibly important as part of this staying in touch with the ecosystem and working with the ecosystem.
And people say AI is hype, right? I think there is probably some truth to like how people think about AI or how people implement AI. But are you seeing if AI is being adopted into production, right? Because that's what matters the most. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to experiment with AI. The infrastructure is arguably getting there, but not ready yet. And so I guess as Intel goes into some of these larger enterprises, how does Intel and how does the enterprises, and maybe it's an analogy for startups as well, to make sure they're ready for adopting AI? Like, what are some of the telltale signs that they're ready to go into AI production?
Okay. That's a great question. And, I'll start with the cloud service providers because they were really the first ones to actually deploy AI. And it was out of necessity. If you look at the major cloud services, people were uploading pictures and videos and so on. And the cloud service providers had to get a handle on that, right? So they had tons of data. Their issue was how you make sense of all of that. How do you tag images? How do you categorize videos so you can quickly, users can quickly find the video or the image that they're looking for? And so that's where it started. Enterprises are a little slower, and I think that's because they have to first find the data that they have. Well, actually, stepping back, they have to figure out where they would apply AI. Some of the steps we talked about in this slide, right? Where is this? How do you put the strategy in place? How do you determine where the data is, and so on? So that's made it a little slower. In terms of deployment, I see a lot of enterprises that are actively building models for different types of use cases. In terms of deployment, there's far fewer that have moved into deployment. And really what it needs is a lot of what we've got in here. Do you have the right people? Do you have an IT team that can take what a data scientist develops and deploy it? And then is there a line of business that can benefit from this? Because at the end of the day, what matters to senior executives at a company is, is this something that's going to give me ROI? Is it going to give me increased customer traction? Is it going to reduce my costs? Is it going to get me new customers? Things like that.
Got it. I think just to play that from the other side of startups selling into enterprises, right? And so one of the questions we occasionally get is, hey, there's so many customers who want to get AI ready. Like, how do we pick and choose which customers to go after? And so a lot of our companies have a comprehensive checklist. Like, one, do they even know what they're looking for, right? So if the data science team is just playing around with trying to figure out what this use case, maybe it's not the best use case to go after. Second is, do they have the buy-in from exec management? Because again, like data science teams build models, and it has to go into production, right?
Right.
And the third piece is, hey, once they build the models, do they actually understand how to deploy it? And if they don't have a deployment story, then it becomes extremely hard for us to go and have them as a customer. And all these show up as revenue metrics for us, right? The cost of customer acquisition is high. They drop off very quickly if they don't have a deployment plan. And even before you go in there, I think we asked several questions like, hey, are you selling into one line of business, or is there like a chief AI officer who actually oversees a lot of line of business? And do they have the budget to go and deploy it? And is it the IT budget, or is it the line of business budget?
Right.
So I think as startups look at enterprises, which is a lot of things like how you or Tech Mahindra would look at selling into larger enterprises, right? But there seems to be bottlenecks, but we're getting to a point where we think we can actually deploy the models, right? And I guess, do you have a case study you want to talk about in terms of how you've deployed it?
Yes, I'm trying to think. There's quite a few. So even within Intel, we've deployed AI. We've deployed AI in our manufacturing processes. We've implemented it for our sales force. So across the board, there's many different areas. Some of the use cases we've worked on, for instance, medical imaging is a good one. We worked, for instance, with GE. And one of the things they wanted to do was apply AI to the CT scanners. So the CT scanners sit in a radiologist's office, and what they'd like to be able to do is have the deployed model run quickly and sort through all the images. And we worked with them. They wanted to implement this with on the workstations, which were running Intel processors. We worked with them, implemented it. And that was one that went very seamlessly. We were able to exceed their targets and so on. But I think the key thing there that made it easy was the GE team was very experienced. They'd already created the models. They knew what they wanted. They knew the performance levels they expected to get. And so it was very, very easy to understand the objective and what was needed to deploy. So everything was lined up. I think in general, it's, you mentioned this, Vijay, you have to go through all those questions to understand the readiness of the organization. And, one question I have for you also is, when you select these AI companies for investments, how do you determine the right company? Is it to fill a particular niche, like, for instance, in the medical space? Is it because they have a process to generate revenue and work with enterprises faster?
I think it's different buckets. I think one of the areas we talked about was MLOps, right? I think we're seeing going from software 1.0, which is rules-driven, to software 2.0, which is more data-driven and more model-driven, right? And so MLOps is coming of age, in my opinion. We talked about AutoML. We have an investment in Data Robot. We also invested in Paperspace, which helps with model building. So ops is one category I think will be a good sector because, as Mike said earlier, you need to have an infrastructure already there. We always look for sectors which have been human operated and to see how machines can augment them. We talked about radiology. It's almost not good to have a doctor look at radiology images because the accuracy is so high. But you still need to augment the doctor for that. We've invested in AI for mobile app testing, which was a very human, rules-driven task. And now we are looking at companies which can automate a lot of this stuff. We've invested in companies which are on the audio and speech and computer vision. So it's a broad spectrum, all the way from IoT to data center applications. So I think it's interesting to see how we can apply AI in different pockets.
Yeah, and you brought up some great points there. One is ML ops. Really, in the deployment of models, ML ops is very important. The previous speaker talked about how models have to be kept in perpetuity. So in other words, you have to, once you develop a model, you're not done. You have to keep going. And so there's got to be a way to operationalize the deployment of these models and make sure they're consistently delivering the results that you need. And then some of the other areas too is, you brought up the end-to-end part of AI, which is an important one. You may be developing a model in the data center, you may be deploying it at the edge in a factory or in a plane or in a car, and so that is an important aspect of AI as well.
And we're also looking at explainability as a investment theme. We need to explain the models, otherwise in some industries you can't deploy it. Data governance, and like you said, if the model drifts, you need to go back and see which data was responsible for that. And a lot of interesting areas for us to invest in. And I think looking forward, it looks like we're probably getting across the hump in terms of actual deployment versus just model building, which is a good sign of AI investments.
Right.
Cool. Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay and Binay. That was an amazing conversation. You touched upon really broad categories today, from AI investments, how startups need to, what startup needs to consider in implementing their technology with large enterprises, talking about the broad spectrum of automation learning and ML ops. Thank you so much.